Good morning, dear learners. Welcome to teaching learning session of sociology. Today we'll discuss about classical ethnography and Indian ethnography. Right? In our last lecture, we discussed about the ethnography, and in continuation with that, today we'll start with classical ethnography. Right? Understanding and defining the ethnography, that is the classical. In one of the most comprehensive understanding of ethnography, both in terms stages in research, that is observation, description, and fieldwork. We know that ethnographers have given much emphasis on the fieldwork, on the observations and the descriptions, right? It is important, according to ethnographer, it is important that there are two types of ethnography we discussed in our last lecture, that is etic and epic, right? So it is important for the researcher to observe the people or the subject under study, to be a part of that community, right? And should be able, after understanding the process thoroughly, why they are doing in that particular manner, what is the relevance of a particular ritual. After understanding that, the ethnographic should be able to describe that, and for this field work is important, right? It is field work. Field work means that researcher should go to that place, where the place of study, should go to the place of study and be the part of the subjects, right? A typical ethnographic study consists of monograph dealing with social group, small enough for the authors to be able to collect most of their material by personal observation. Personal observation is very important, and ethnographical study is basically a monograph, and it deals with the social group. That should be small enough, right? And the author should be able to observe the subjects under study and collect the data from them. Ethnography also includes the methods and technique connected with the field work, with the classification, description, and analysis of a particular cultural phenomenon. Field work is very important, right? It is mandatory for a researcher to go visit that place and to be part of that community which is under study, right? And it is important that they should be classified, describe, and analyze the particular cultural phenomenon. After understanding that particular cultural phenomenon, the ethnographer should be able to describe and analyze that particular cultural phenomenon. According to Hamsley, for most anthropologists from the early 20th century, ethnography involved actually living in communities of people, being studies more or less round the clock, participating in their degree activities to one degree or to another, as well as interviewing them, collecting genealogies, drawing maps of locale, and collecting artifacts, and so on. And we discussed about this in our last lecture, right? There are certain key sign points of classical ethnography, like ethnography is a methodology, participant observation is a method, and field work refers to the period of primary data collection that is conducted out of the office, right? So what is ethnography? First of all, ethnography is nothing but it's a methodology, right? It's a methodology, right? And that observation, that participant observation is required. What is participant observation means? Participation observation is a method, right, to collect the data. It's a method to collect the ethnography is a methodology. It's a methodology, while participant observation is a method to collect the data, and field work refers to that period of primary data collection that is conducted out of the office, means when the researcher goes to the field, to the place, and collect the primary data, or to understand the particular culture. Agronauts of Western Pacific by B. Malinovisky. This work is considered to be not only the classical text in anthropology, but also the foundation on which Trochee of anthropology, that is the field work, participant observation, and learning of the native language dialect by the anthropographer had been formulated. That Belinovsky was the first anthropologist who adopted this methodology, ethnography. We discussed about this, right? And his work, that is Agronaut of the Western Pacific, right? It's a classical text of the ethnography, right? It's a classical text of anthropology, right? And it is also the foundation of ethnography, right? In this, Malinowski stated about the field work. He conducted the field work, participant observation, and learning of the culture, or the learning of culture of the natives, or their language, and that all these have been formulated, right? 2 years long term intensive field work in 1915-16 and 17-18, that is 15 to 18, in the Tobrin Island reconfigured anthropological research method. He conducted he formulated this, he started this anthropography, right? Malinowski, and there he conducted his research work, field work, for extensive field work for 2 years, that is from 15 to 18, in the Tobrin and Islands, right? He was fascinated by the Kula is a ritual which he saw as a circulating exchange or trading system of the valuable, where the primitive native people stripped the commodity of its materialistic value and treated it as a symbol of exchange, fostering kinship and the group ties. He observed a ritual that is known as Kula. Kula is what? Kula is a ritual, right? It is a circulating exchange, or it is a circulating exchange or trading system of valuables, right? How it happens that the primitive native people, that the those who was having that valuable, that the primitive native people stripped off the commodity, right, of its materialistic value, right, and treat it as a symbol of exchange, fostering the kinship and the group of ties, right? That is, when you are exchanging the materialistic, valuable materialistic good, for fostering kinship and the ties. Elaborating upon the basis of ethnographic research, the three foundation stones of fieldwork, Malinowski stated. The student must possess the real scientific aim, right, and knows the value and the criteria of modern ethnography, right? First is that the real scientific aim should be clear, right? Second, to live without other white men, right, among the natives. And second important is the field work, that you should live with the natives. Finally, he has to apply a number of special methods of collecting, manipulating, and fixing his evidences, right? And then after that Malinowski, Radcliffe Brown was the second one who adopted this ethnography methodology, right? And both A.R. Radcliffe Brown and Malinowski were the British anthropologists, right? And the Andaman Islander by A.R. Radcliffe Brown, that is his work on Andaman, right? The Andaman Islander is a study in social anthropology by A.R. Radcliffe Brown, was a result of anthropological research carried out in the Andaman Island during the year 1906 to 8, so as to understand the social institution of the tribes of the Great Andaman. He carried out this study in the Andaman Island, right from he spent 1902 years at this island, that is from 1906 to 1908, as to understand the social institution. He tried to understand the social institutions of the tribes of the Great Andaman. In the process of study, he looked into integrative function of an institution, and while studying the social organization of the tribes, right, he outlined two main divisions termed as the Great Andaman Group and the Little Andaman Group, having their own distinctive elements. So he tried to understand the social organization or social institution of the tribes, right? Andaman tribes. So in this process of study, he looked as an integrative function of an institution. He looked that there is an integration function of the institution, right? All the institutions functions in integration to maintain the social order, right? So he observed an integrative function of the institution while he was studying the social organization of the social tribes. He outlined that there are the two main divisions and termed as the Great Andaman group and the Little Andaman group. For him, living as he must in daily contact with the people he is studying, the field anthropologist comes gradually and understand them, if you can use the term. The better the observer, the more accurate will be the general impression of the mental peculiarities of the race. So, according to Redcliffe Brown, it is important that researchers should carry out the field study, and uh, should stay with the natives should stay with the natives or subject under the study. Then only you can understand their mental peculiarities of that particular race. Then only you can understanding why they are doing what they are doing, right? Okay. Then the another study is Coming of Ages in Samoa by Margaret Mead. We'll discuss all these studies in detail, right? Then the another study of classical ethnography is Coming of Age in Samoa by Margaret Mead, psychologist study of primitive youth of Western civilization by Margaret Mead. And Mead attempted to answer what difficulties like rebellion against the authority, philosophical perplexities, the flowering of idealism, conflict, and struggle ascribe the period of physical development due to being adolescent in America. Right? In course of her investigation and ethnographic exploration, attempting to underline the unique cultural pattern, Mead tried to present the reader the Samoa girl in her social setting to describe the course of her life from birth until death. So Mead tried to coming the ages of Samoa. Mead study about the Samoa girls, right? So she tried Samoa girls. She tried to present the life, the social settings or the life of the Samoa girls from birth until death, right? Then these were some classical ethnography, and we'll discuss about all these studies in detail in our coming lectures. Now, Indian ethnography. What is Indian ethnography? Ethnography uses a method of first-hand written description of different cultures, right? So, ethnography is uses the method of the first-hand written description of the different culture. It pulls together all scattered pieces of data into common thread and present it as a whole. It is essentially a comparative study which looks at the question about human existence from the point of view of specific society and cultural system that exist within it. There are three critical questions that constantly reoccur when talking about ethnography in context of self and others. There are how do we know, what do we know, how do we assume to speak for someone else, and finally, who is being addressed to, right? See, there are a few critical questions, right, that constantly reoccur when we're talking about the ethnography in context of self and other. First is there are how do we know what we know, right? How do you know how do we know what we know? And second question is how do we assume to speak for someone else? And finally, who is being addressed to, right? Modern anthropology of India. The idea of modern secular India has its origin in the second half of 19th century. There are three major areas which influenced the emergence of anthropology in India. The first, these were the colonial attempts by the British India to understand the historical and the ethnographic knowledge. Right. So, This idea of modern anthropology and secular India has its origin in the second half of the 19th century. There are three major areas which are influenced the emergence of anthropology in India. The first of these were the colonial attempts. The first attempt was done by the British India to understand the historical perspectives of the India and ethnographic knowledge, to understand the ethnographic knowledge and historical knowledge, that is for their betterment. Secondly, the lot of societies in general were founded and materials were displayed in the museum. This was also a way in which subject was able to enter as well as make a mark for itself in the university setup. So second was that various materials for various societies, journals were founded and various materials were displayed in the museum. And thirdly, the movement of an independent India was also a reaction to increasing control that colonial rules was exerting on Indian state, and anthropology was one of the way in which this was done. Right. So it has three areas. Before independence, the anthropological work of in India was majorly descriptive and encyclopedic in nature. And idea was creation of an image of India that was seen as an exotic culture that needed to be explored and discovered, right? So before independence, the anthropological work in India were basically descriptive and encyclopedic in nature. And the reason was that they want to create an image of India that was an exotic, that India is an exotic culture and that needed to be explored and discovered. It was only a few decades before the independence, around 1920s and 30s, that the discipline of anthropology was able to break from the administrative chains, and studies took place in India now looked at the understanding of India from a different perspective, right? Before 1920s and 30s, that this anthropology was used for the administrative purposes, and only around 1920 20s and 30s the anthropology was able to break from the administrative chains, and study took place in the India took place to understand the India from a different perspectives. Post 1947, the discipline of modern anthropology Post 1947, the discipline of modern anthropology developed as a separate field, right? After independence, right, the anthropology of India, modern anthropology has developed as a separate field, wherein not just within the country but also a global level. It went through a numerous changes with regards to its discourse, methodology, and conceptual understanding. So there was a vast change in the anthropology, not only in India but globally, right? Post 1947, this anthropology developed as a separate field in India, right? Not within the country. There were the certain global changes, like there were the changes in anthropology with regard to its discourse, with regards to its methodology and the conceptual understanding. The Indian anthropology post independence stated to get influenced by the international debates in anthropology and had discussion on the social and the symbolic values, on ideas and values, and on the ideas of resistance as well as on the concept of post colonialism. So that is the post-independent India anthropology was influenced by the uh, international debates and the discussion on the social and the symbolic values. Right now, emphasis has been laid on the social and the symbolic values. That it was influenced by the ideas and values and on the ideas of resistance as well as the concept of the post colonialism. In the year that followed independence, anthropologists conducted detailed ethnographic research in all parts of the country, even though not equal attention has been accorded to the different parts of the country. Right. So, what is the contribution of Indian anthropologists in this? In context to India, there are seven eminent Indian scholars who have been mentioned, whose work have been instrumental to the birth and development of anthropology in India. And these are S.C. Roy, right, G.S. Gure, N.K. Bose, D.N. Majumdar, L.R. Vidyarthi, Sujit Sinha, and S.C. Dubey, and we have discussed many of them in our previous lectures. Right, so there are certain eminent anthropologists who work, right, for the development, who worked, their work have been instrumental in the growth and the development of anthropology in India, like these eminent sociologists are the S.C. Roy, right, G.S. Gure, then comes the N.K. Bose, then D.N. Majumdar, L.R. Vidyarthi, Sujit Sinha, and S.C. Dubey. S.C. Roy made the first attempt in 1921 to provide a bibliographical account of all the publications on the tribes and the caste till that time, which was present in the published magazine, compilation of handbook and monographs of the tribes. So what I see, right, did S.C. Roy in 1921 provided a bibliographical account of publication of all tribes and castes till that time, right? D.N. Majumdar made an attempt similar to Roy in 1946 when he reviewed how anthropology had developed so far and how the condition of the study was under British administration. So S.C. Dubey tried to understand the development of anthropology and the condition of anthropology under British administration. Right. G.S. Gure, in his article, The Teaching of Sociology, Social Psychology and Social Anthropology in 1956, mentioned how India had not managed to keep pace with the development that was happening in the Europe and America. And while the British influence was still present, the understanding of American social anthropology was completely missing. So he emphasized that Indian anthropology is influenced by the Britishers, and that understanding of American anthropology, social anthropology, is completely missing, right, in Indian scenario. S.C. Dubey discussed the similar issue in 1962. He highlighted the need of more refined techniques of methodology and research for Indian social anthropology. Right? So S.C. Rai took the same line in 1962 and he highlighted the need of more refined technique and methodology and research for Indian social anthropology, right? So it is, according to them, it is important that that we should develop more refined techniques so that we can conduct the anthropological studies more accurately. In 1963, N.K. Bose come up with the booklet 50 Years of Science in India, Progress of Anthropology and Archaeology, in which he discussed the progress of anthropology in India with respect to prehistoric archaeological, cultural anthropology and the physical anthropology. L.R. Vidyarthi in 1964 referred to the emergence of new trends in Indian anthropology, which was study of village, caste, religion, kinship, and emergence of applied anthropology. So it was L.R. Vidyarthi, right, that he referred to the emergence of new trends in Indian anthropology. He referred to the emergence of the new trends of Indian anthropology, which was the study of the villages, right, caste, religion, kinship, right, and the emergence of applied applied anthropology, right. Surjit Sinha in 1968 in a conference observed that the direction that the Indian anthropology was not so much as imitation of West, but rather to establish the Indian tradition in anthropology. So, as per Surjit Sinha, it is important to establish the Indian tradition in anthropology rather than towing the line of the West. Right? There are the various phases of Indian anthropology. Right? Vidyarthi and Sinha divided the growth of anthropology into four phases. Right? That is the formative phase, the constructive phase, and the evaluative phase. The formative phase is from 1772 to 1919. Right? The constructive phase from 20 to 1920 to 1949, and the evaluative phase is 1990 onwards. What is the formative phase? That is that last from 1772 to 1990. Anthropology in colonial India was mostly undertaken by the government. In that sense, most people who undertake this work belong to Indian civil services. A few others were part of the army, and some belonged to the medical, educational, and police and other services. So, this was the formative phase, right? In India, during the colonial period, these anthropological studies were basically carried out by the government, and those who undertook this work were from the administrative services, and they carried out these researches to understand the Indian society properly so that they can control Indian society in a better way, right? And a few others who carried it apart from the Indian civil services, people from the Indian civil services, few others who were the part of these studies were from the army, some belong to the medical, educational, and police and other services. The study of anthropology in India began around the same time that the census of the country were being taken, that is around 1871 to 72. And this census has been started by the Britishers, and the anthropological studies were carried out study on the basis of the caste, right? And this was continued in 1911, so much so that both census were largely considered as the anthropological classics, right? In a similar vein, the 1931 census was very important milestone in an ethnological study, as it formed the basis of classification of the people of subcontinent. So the census of the 1901 and 1911 census were important because for the first time, that is the detailed study on the basis of caste and religion has been carried out, right? And in the 1931 census, right, this was a milestone in ethnological study. Why it is a milestone in ethnological study? Because it forms the basis of classification of people in subcontinent, right? In 19th century, the common belief among anthropologists in India was that people had descended either from more advanced Aryans or more indigenous primitive Dravidians, right? So, in 19th century, the common belief of anthropologists in India that people are either they are descendant from the Aryans or from Dravidians. Risley in his work discussed how the division among the caste cannot only be explained by the division of the labor, but rather how it was hierarchical distinction between the fair-skinned Aryans who were at the higher pedestal and the dark-skinned Dravidians who were at the lower pedestal. His theory also supported the anthropometrical measurements. So, Risley carried out study in 1901. This was the first census, right? Detailed census, right? So, Risley in his study discussed the division among the caste, right? He discussed the division among the caste, that he explained the division of that on the basis of caste, there is not only the division of the labor, right? We have divided the caste on the basis of labor. We have different caste has been allocated to different type of the works, right? So he described here that there is a division of labor on the basis of this there is a division of labor on the basis of the caste, but there is an apart from this, there is an hierarchical distinction between the fair skinned Aryans and the dark skinned Dravidians, right? That those fair skinned fair skinned Aryans were on the high pedestal, while those dark skinned Dravidians were at the lower pedestal, right? And this theory supported the anthropometrical measurement. Crook, on the other hand, included anthropometric data from the northwestern provinces to show that the nasal indices varied only marginally among the caste and the tribe, and this could not be taken as a basis of caste, which for him could only be found among the occupation. Right. Next is the constructive phase. So first was the formative phase, right? Next is the constructive phase, that is from 1920 to 1949. A new turn came into the anthropological study when social anthropology was included as subject and curriculum of University of Calcutta in 1920 in postgraduate syllabus. So this in 1920, this anthropology ethnographic study and this ethnographic study was included as a subject in the curriculum in University of Calcutta in postgraduation syllabus. Work by Majumdar on racial and ethnic surveys in Bengal, Gujarat, and Uttar Pradesh, which was an important step in study of the physical and social anthropology. And M. N. Srinivas work on the marriage and family in Mysore. These were the important work, that is the Majumdar works on the racial and the ethnic surveys in Bengal, Gujarat, and Uttar Pradesh. He carried out the racial and ethnic surveys, and the work of Srinivas on marriage and family in Mysore is these are considered as an important work in Indian ethnography or anthropology. In 1945, the Anthropological Survey of India was established in India, which looked at the anthropometric study in the different parts of the country and focused on the racial classification based on ethnic differences, right? So in 1945, the anthropological survey of India was established in India, and this anthropological survey of India looked at the anthropometric studies. They looked at the anthropometric study in the different parts of the country and focused on the racial classification. They focused on the racial classification, that is on the basis, that is based on the differences of ethnic differences. This was also the time when the Vermer Elwin published a number of books on the tribal people of Madhya Pradesh, Arunachal Pradesh, and Orissa, which were seen as the classic within the field. So we discussed about the Elwin in our last lecture, right? So Vermer Elwin published the various number of books on the tribal people of the Madhya Pradesh, Arunachal Pradesh, and the Orissa. The subject thus matured within this period and influenced by the British line of thoughts and the work done by the eminent universities in Europe. The Indian anthropologists too stated the look at the Indian anthropology from a different light and started to develop their own distinct study. So this formative phase is the phase of the develop. This is the Indian anthropological development phase, right? Then comes the analytical period from 1950 to 1990, post Second World War and the Indian independence. In addition to the British line of thought, the American style of anthropology was also seen, right? The understanding of India as a pre-literate, isolated society, one that had been influence of the British thought, was replaced during this period with more emphasis on inward thoughts and study of India as a complex society emerged with the idea of village study gaining more traction. So we were influenced by the Britishers, right, by Europe, right? A post in analytical period, that is the post Second World War and independence, right? That in addition to the British line of thought, the American style of anthropology has also been seen, and as per the British line of thought, right, they considered the India as pre-literate society, right, and isolated society, and this idea was replaced during this period, that is during the analytical period, and more emphasis has been given on the inward thoughts and study of India. India has emerged as a complex society, and during this period, that India has emerged as a complex society. How it has been emerged as a complex society? That at this time, the study of the villages had gained much traction, right? The work in 1955 by the American anthropologist Mick Kim Marriott, titled Village India Studies in the Little Community, is one of the great significance in Indian anthropology. In India, the shift was observed from more of tribal studies to now, where the emphasis was more on the study of Indian civilization from the grassroots levels. Indian anthropologists like D.N. Majumdar, M.N. Srinivas, S.C. Dubey were important figures in the study of community and the village studies. Not just influenced by the British and the American anthropologists, but the French structuralists such as Lévi-Strauss and the Dumont and Leach influenced the study of kinship and caste respectively. Right? So they also influenced the study of kinship and the caste. Right? In late 20th century, around 1980s and 90s, the understanding to anthropology underwent a drastic change. And this change was a result of reaction of the caste study that were popularized by the structural functionalist approach of Louis Dumont in 1960 and 70s. Louis Dumont carried out a research on the Indian caste, and he carried out this in 1960s and 70s, and this made the understanding this made that a drastic change in the Indian anthropology. This declines from the village study model was what allowed the Indian anthropology to break out of the mold of the caste and move on to the larger structure within the Indian settings, such as the class, religion, and so on. Right? So see the change from tribes to caste, from tribe to village studies, which includes the caste, and from village studies, right, to that was mold on the caste to a larger structure of Indian settings such as the class, religion, and so on because of the dominant understanding of the great and the little tradition. This great and little tradition has been defined by the Robert Redfield, right? Social and economic, this understanding of great and little tradition, social and economic basis of the Indian society, great and the little tradition. This tradition, this has been defined or described by the Robert Redfield Brown, right? Then the social and economic basis of Indian society, that is the Kathy Gog and Leach and N.K. Bose. The study of caste as a system of stratification, it has been done by the M.N. Srinivas among, gave a rise to a perspective and helped the discipline explain leaps and bounds. So from the now this anthropology has underwent drastic changes from tribes to villages, to great and literary tradition, to economic, social and economic basis of the India, right? Study of the caste system, that is the stratification of the caste done by M. N. Srinivas, right? This has given a leap and lead to Indian sociology, Indian anthropology. Post independence, the spirit of nationalism was strong among the Indian scholars, which also led to their creation of multiplicity of indigenous approach to study of society. N.K. Bose developed a model to look at the process of modernization of tribes and caste. S.C. Dubé looked at the Indian civilization through sixfold classification of tradition, that is the classical, national, regional, local, western, and local subcultural tradition of social groups. Iravati Karve tried to explain the Indian civilization on the basis of historical, linguistic, structural, and cultural variables. So, she tried to explain the Indian civilization on the basis of what? Historical, linguistic, structural, and cultural variable. B.K. Roy Burman, in order to understand India in terms of social political process, developed the concept of a nation and sub-nation. So, B.K. Burman has developed a concept of nation and sub-nation. To why he has developed this? To understand India in terms of socio-political process. M. N. Srinivas came up with the mobility model to understand the social change. Right? Mobility model, we discussed about the mobility model. What is the mobility model? That when the caste at the lower pedestal of the hierarchy tries to imitate the structure, imitate the caste at the lower pedestal of the hierarchy, right? Then this is known as the mobility, social mobility, and this brings us social changes. So G. Sinha posted tribes and caste at two opposite continents in order to understand the social structure of Indian society, right? So, Sujit Sinha described the tribes and caste as the two opposite continents, right? To understand the social structure of the Indian society. Last period is the evaluative period, that is 1990 onwards, right? What is this evaluative period? Post realization that the British and American anthropological analysis are unable to explain sufficiently the complexity of Indian society, the need for reorientation of discipline was needed. Right? There is now an increasing interest in new emerging field and subfield of anthropology, such as medical anthropology, development studies, and the psychological studies. First of all, we were influenced by the British studies, British anthropology, right? After that, after post Second World War, that we get along with the British anthropologists, we started taking into account the American anthropologists, and during evaluation period, post the realization of British and American anthropological analysis, it has been realized that they are not able to explain the complexities of Indian society in details. So it is required that there should be some reorientation of the discipline, right? There is more than increased interest in newly emerging fields and subfield of anthropology. The interaction of the discipline with other Indian ethnography, social sciences, especially sociology, has provided with unique element of study. In this way, both disciplines now can rely on each other to look at issues pertaining to tribal, the agrarian, and the industrial, social, economic, society, cultural system, and give rise to the holistic understanding of the discipline. Right? So, this both in this way, the both disciplines that now can rely on order to issue pertaining to the tribal, right, the agrarian, and the industrial, socio-economic society, and the cultural system, and give rise to the holistic understanding of the discipline. So we cannot leave any of the things, right? Because Indian society is a complex society. To understand the society, Indian society completely, it is important to understand each and every aspect of the Indian society, whether it's tribal, whether it's agrarian society, whether it's industrial socio-economical society, whether it's the cultural system of the India. So this gave rise to the holistic understanding of the discipline, right? So today we discussed about the classical ethnography and the Indian ethnography in detail, right? What is the classical ethnography, right? In classical ethnography, right, we define that what is ethnography, and then we discussed about the few key sign points of the classical ethnography, like that there should be the, see, in ethnography what is important is ethnography, what is anthropology, it is nothing but a methodology, right? In ethnography is a methodology, and that participation observation is very important method in this methodology, right? Understand the difference between methodology and method. And it is required to carry out the ethnography, it is important to carry out the field work, and the field work refers to the period of the primary data collection that is conducted out of the office. Field work means that it is required that the researcher should be a part of the community of under study, right? So that he or she could carry out the research properly, right? And that the typical ethnographical study consists of the monograph. We discussed about that, and this should deal with a small group that should so that author can collect the data through primary observations, right? It should not be difficult for them, right? Then we discussed about that few classical studies carried out by different anthropologists. In our last lecture, we discussed that B. Malinovisky was the first one, right, who started this method, right? Who started this ethnographic method, right? Ethnography, and his studies agronauts of the Western Pacific, right? He carried out his study on the Tobran Island, right? And his work is considered as one of the most classical texts in anthropology, right? And this work is considered as the foundation on which foundation of the ethnography, right? And in this work he described about the field study, the participant observation, and he discussed why it is important to learn the to live with the natives and to learn the language of the natives, right? Why it is important to understand their culture, right? And he spent 2 long years in the Tobran Island to get the to understand their culture and to collect the primary data. And during that period he was fascinated by a Kula ritual, right? Kula is what Kula ritual is. In Kula ritual, what it is nothing but the exchange of material, that is exchange of material or exchange of a valuable material it has been done to foster the kinship and the group ties, right? That is known as the kula. Then Malinovisky discussed few important points, that according to Malinovisky, it is important that researchers should understand, researchers should spend time with the natives, should do the field work, then only the researcher can describe what they are doing, why they are observing or why they are behaving in the particular way, right? Then it is important for a researcher to understand their language. Should a researcher should understand their language, right? And second is, it is important that the primary data should be collected for the research. And the same line has been told by the Redcliffe Brown, that is Malinowski and Redcliffe Brown, both were English anthropologist, right? His study, that is the Andaman Islander, in his study, this study has been done by the Redcliffe Brown, and in his study, he described the rituals, and he carried out this study among the tribes of the Andaman Island, and he tried to understand the lives and the ritual of the tribes, Andaman tribes, Redcliffe Brown. And another is, another study has been, classical study has been done by the Margaret Mead, that is her study is coming of ages in Samoa, right? In her study, that is coming in ages of Samoa, she tried to describe or discuss the life of Samoan girls from birth until death, right? Then we discussed about the Indian ethnography, right? Indian ethnography, this has been started by Britishers, right? Why they did this? So that they should have better understanding of the Indian society, and they can control the Indian society well. And the first ethnographical study was done in 1901 by their Beasley, and this is known as the census. During this census has been started much earlier, right? But 1901 census was important. Why it was important? Because during this census, Risley carried out the detailed study of on the basis of the caste, right? So 1901 census was important because during this census, Risley tried to explain the caste system of this Indian society, right? The similar line has been told in 1911 census, right? Right. And during this census, the Britishers came to know about the caste, the value of the caste system, and the role of the caste system in Indian society. They also came to know about the hierarchical system, right? That there are the two races in India, Aryans and the Dravidian, and hierarchical system. The Aryans hold the top hierarchies of this, and the Dravidians are at the bottom of the hierarchy, right? Then there are then we discussed about the periods of Indian anthropology. There are various Indian anthropologists who contributed a lot in Indian anthropology, and then we discussed about the various phases of Indian anthropology. We discussed about the formative phase, the constructive phase, and the evaluationary phase. The formative phase is what, when it is the beginning of the Indian anthropologist, right? We were that has been done by the Britishers, and it is from 17. This phase is from 1717 to 1919, right? And the second phase was the constructive phase. It was from 1920 to 1949. Various studies has been conducted out, right? During this, the analytical phase is, then the third phase is the analytical phase, that is from 1950 to 90s. Before this, we were influenced only by the British anthropologists, but now during this phase, the Indian anthropologists consider that it is important to understand the American anthropologist point of view, and they try to understand it in anthropologist point of view, and they were influenced. And not only they along with the Britishers, Americans, the French anthropologists contributed a lot, like Levi Strauss, right? Many studies has been carried out during this, right? That is various studies like the various concepts, right? Great and little tradition has been described by the Robert Redfield, right? Then social and economic basis of the Indian society has been discussed by Edmund Leach and N.K. Bose. That is the M.N. Srinivas carried out a study of the caste on the basis of the stratification and how it leads to the social order and social mobility, right? All this has been done during this phase, and the last phase was the evaluative phase, that is from 1990 onwards, right? That's all for today. Thank you very much. Namaskar.